What's the low-hanging fruit? You want to increase your likelihood of getting pregnant. Do these things as a bare minimum.
I look at, okay, what are the core sort of biological pillars that if we optimize, they will have a cascading effect, sperm quality, egg quality, hormones, all of this. Your metabolic health is going to influence circulating inflammation in your body. Another one is thinking about microbiome health. I think about the micro nanoplastics. It's BPA, it's phthalates, it's PFAS, which are the forever chemicals. We have the pesticides and herbicides. Based off of all of the research on the reproductive outcomes, taking longer time to get pregnant, the lower odds of getting pregnant, reduce sperm quality and motility. If something is off, we need to uncover why.
And we are live. Rachel, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's awesome to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you and learn something. So you are about to release a book in just a few months, like January, I believe, right?
Yes, January. And get this, I actually received my first copy, of course, by the time of this recording, as of 2 days ago. So I'm kind of seeing it for the first time, just like you are.
It's pretty cool when you get your actual physical copy in the mail and you can like hold it and flip through the pages. It's like, wow, this is something that I just made.
It is wild. And look, I know probably like every founder feels that way. I'm sure you felt that way kind of getting different, your bar, the concepts back from that, right? At each stage. And like any founder in sort of a CPG company that has a physical product, I'm like, wow, they must feel the exact same way too. Because after you work on something for so long, and in my case, 3 years after work, kind of grinding on this, it's wild to kind of hold it in my hands. So yes.
Well, that is very much so deserving of congratulations. So congrats to you for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I hope it helps a lot of people. Look, that's why I wrote it, and because it certainly wasn't to be an author. That's for sure.
I've got no doubt it will help people. So let's dive into the weeds here. So you wrote a book on optimizing fertility. What got you interested in that landscape to begin with? Like, what was the catalyst for you becoming interested in that topic?
Yeah, there's certainly multiple catalysts. There's so many layers to this question, but yes, let's kind of to give you a lay of the land, Robert. So I'm working as a full-time clinician in practice, and what I was witnessing as a trend just year after year is women are presenting into office. They're feeling very disempowered about the whole process of getting pregnant. So they're typically, confused about what to do. They were likely given reactive advice that's based off of symptoms, or they're essentially getting a one-size-fits-all, like fertility diet plan, if you will. And I mean, this just speaks to the conventional fertility advice in general, right? So it's not setting up women for success. It's not preventative and proactive in nature, and it's not optimizing the underlying physiology to improve chances of getting pregnant. So, Robert, I actually refer to this, what I just described, as fertility 1.0, and there are so many reasons why that is a massive disservice to women. That is the core of why I had to write this book.
I love it. Well, that's a pretty good motivating factor for sure. I feel like I had a podcast, I don't even know if it's gone live yet, but I had a podcast with a guest a while back talking about just standard of care as it pertains to fertility. And it's pretty much just IGF, right? Like that's like what everybody points to. And you don't really get a whole lot of outside opinions. Like you just go into your primary care, that's what they direct you towards. And then you just keep trying until it happens, if it happens.
And I mean, but think about what you just said. It's like, this is wild. And for a few reasons. So number one, it's like, building a family, that's a lifelong dream of so many people, right? But then all of a sudden the time comes, we don't really know what to do. It's like, what do you go to your doctor, or you get kind of this standard, prenatal workup, very standard, but of course that's needed as well. Yes. And then you're kind of going off and just trying to conceive. But they're like, what advice, I'm actually curious about you, like, what advice did you and Crystal get? It was likely standard prenatal workup, probably like take a prenatal, right? Like, were you seeing like an integrative doctor that was giving you a bunch of advice, or were you like, okay, and then you just kind of went off and did your thing. Luckily, you both are in the fitness field, so I'd
Yeah.
imagine you already have that background knowledge. But like, what was
We
your
were we were pretty fortunate because I mean, we were pretty steeped in nutrition and lifestyle before we ever planned to conceive because we kinda waited a little bit longer to have our first. So I knew all the functional health doctors. I had been studying this for quite some time, and I
Yeah.
pretty much knew like, we get lab works proactively just because we wanna know. So we knew we were both healthy, fertile, and when the time come to have a kid, we're like, "Okay, just make sure you're using these desired prenatals that we had researched, and then just continue to eat like you are and lift like you are." And we had no issues whatsoever conceiving and getting pregnant. Um, but I feel like that is definitely not the norm. I mean, I've been
Oh,
podcasting and talking with these experts for
yeah.
years.
You are basically like the minority in that, right? And yes, like I totally know. I mean, you're dialing things in before you have been for at least a decade prior. But just think about all the people who are not in the health
Mhm.
and fitness realm. Like, how the heck do they know where to start, right? And that's kind of what I'm seeing in practice. And that's just the reality of of the country that we're living in. And so it's so interesting because yes, and I kind of suspected your experience certainly is a little bit different compared to what everyone else is going through. Um, so essentially, yes, if problems arise, it's kind of like, well, you are going to see a fertility doctor, right? A reproductive endocrinologist after 6 or 12 months of trying that. Those are just kind of standard
Mhm.
guidelines that we have. But it's wild to me when I think about how much money and resources are being sort of pumped into the industry of assisted reproductive technologies, which are by all means modern day miracles. However, it's like I just think about how much we're being put into that, whereas we're not even doing the basics on how to make our bodies more receptive to starting a new life.
Totally, totally agree. Out of curiosity, from a statistic standpoint, I mean, we've heard that you know, the fertility rate is down, that everything's down as far as having babies is concerned. Like the actual amount of children that people are having in a single family is reduced. A lot of people are waiting until later to have kids, if at all. Can you just kind of throw some of those stats out? Like how much of that is a result of the inability to have kids versus just the lack of desire to have kids? Or is that really quantifiable?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard. So, and to touch on what you just mentioned, think about in terms of like the infertility, is going up. But I mean, also think about like testosterone, right? And that trend line is going down. And sperm count, that trend line is going down. We're seeing more complications in pregnancy, like gestational diabetes going up. Like, kind of, these are not kind of favorable trend lines, no matter what way that you look at
Mhm.
this. But yeah, so speaking to that point, this is where it's so multifactorial that we can't name one thing. It's to your point of, some individuals, they are waiting to much later in life. And yes, we know age is a risk factor, right? For infertility, for example, like that's undeniable, age and, wanting to have fewer children. So we have those stats, but I think about as my role and my job as a dietitian, I think about all of the environmental factors at play that's making sort of this very, very, it's making it much more difficult to conceive naturally. I think about, our nation and how many people are metabolically healthy, which is about 1 in 10. And we know metabolic health is a huge factor in our ability to conceive, which not many people are paying attention to, except for
So 1 in
potentially
10,
listeners on your podcast. But
1 in 10, is that the official stat right now? 1 in 10 people are metabolically healthy?
yes,
That's
which is
crazy.
nuts when you think about it. So it's typically between 1 in 8 and 1 in 10. This just depends on basically the research that's being done on metabolic health. They use slightly different criteria based off of the organization that's doing the research. That's why it's kind of like 1 in 8 or 1 in 10, just depending on the criteria and what academy or organization had did that research. So but yes, it's mind-blowing, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I say, if this plays into such a large role in getting pregnant, but only 1 in 10 are metabolically healthy, I'm not extrapolating or suggesting that that's why we're having all these problems. This is just kind of one lever that I'm like, wow, this is a big lever that we have in our favor to optimize in order to support our body, and potentially unblock some biological hurdles that are happening.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when you look at the stats on overweight and obesity, it's like that's pretty abysmal too. Like 50% of the population is obese or at least overweight. And then the obesity epidemic's obviously trending upwards as well. But when you break it down to like 1 in 10 people are actually healthy, like that just, I haven't heard it flipped in that context before. And that's just mind blowing in and of itself. Like in my opinion, it should be our responsibility to be healthy. Like we're born in a state of health, give or take, genetic disorders and mutations, things like that, birth defects. So like maintaining health throughout one's life and improving upon it is just a fundamental responsibility of being alive. It's like the cost of doing business, so to speak. And if you're not even a healthy individual, then it's kind of a selfish act because you're impairing the ability for those that are close to you to thrive. Like if your spouse wants to get pregnant and have kids and she's not able to because of your life decisions to be unhealthy, like how is that real? How is that favorable in any way?
Yeah, I mean, Robert, that's actually so interesting that you just with your perspective on this, which I really appreciate. And you actually said something that isn't as largely recognized these days, which is kind of a man's health, particularly and specifically based off of what we're talking about, the metabolic health and how this plays a role, right, into pregnancy. And I don't know if you know, but just kind of some like fun facts for you. A man's metabolic health that also influences, you know, a woman's development for various conditions while she's pregnant, like, gestational hypertension, for example. So it is wild. And that's why, pregnancy is very, very much a team sport. I think this is being more recognized in the public a little bit. At least it's starting to surface. But yeah, it's unbelievable, but very, very well said. I hadn't thought about that
I would
before.
I would love for you to flesh that out in great detail because I do think it is becoming more known, but I still think there's a massive gap in people's realization of how important it. I mean, it's literally like a 50-50. Like it takes two to tango. And when you have an unhealthy spouse, like if the man is unhealthy, simply able to have sex and get her pregnant, I mean, that's not fulfilling half of the equation right there. Like that, there's a lot more to it than that. And from an epigenetic standpoint, like there's extreme downstream consequences there too, like the health of that baby, the health of their babies. Like you can't just take it for granted.
Yeah, and look, this is the one time point in our life, right? Prior to pregnancy, this is the one time point I think about the male kind of component, and it's like he has the ability to not just impact his child based off of, again, his health prior to getting pregnant. He can impact his child's health, right? Their susceptibility or their risk for later disease development, but they also have the chance to influence their wife's health, right? Or their partner's health. And so it's kind of like they're influencing their health, their wife's health, their baby's health. I'm like, what other time in life does a male have that ability to influence three people,
Uh,
right? I mean, it's really cool kind of when you take a step back and think about sort of the opportunity that we have, right, to make such a positive influence. So to kind of flesh out some more details as to what we're talking about. So, for example, I'll give you one example of a study that I wrote about in the book, which is basically 1 million pregnancies were evaluated in this study. And what they found is basically as dad's metabolic health like worsened or declined. So this was measured, by the way. So metabolic health, let me take a step back. Metabolic health, as measured in studies, it's looking at waist circumference because that's a proxy of visceral body fat, which happy to get into, but I'm sure you talk about all the time with your audience. They measure waist circumference, triglycerides, HDL, cholesterol, blood pressure, and fasting glucose. Again, these aren't perfect measurements, but this is just what the criteria is used. They basically found as the more of these criteria that men met, right, and not being healthy, metabolically healthy, the higher the risk of recurrent pregnancy loss. Now, that is a very big deal. I don't know if you know people in your life that, have had a miscarriage. It's very common, but like, again, why wouldn't we set ourselves up for success?
Mhm.
And a male could do that as well for the female. It's not just about, the female and her risk of miscarriage. Like, no, men contribute to that too. So I try to call this out in every single chapter of the book of how important the male factor is.
I think it's just a matter of like taking responsibility of yourself for others. I mean, when people recognize, like, if people believe they can be totally isolated and it's not going to have an impact on others, they can justify making poor decisions with their health. They can drink, they can smoke, they can stay up late, they can eat poor food. But if they were to realize that those decisions would have a cascading effect on their most innermost circle, their spouse, their kids, I would hope that that would influence their decisions and sway them away from those negative habitual habits. I mean, maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part, but I feel like when you accept that responsibility, it totally changes the landscape and how you think and every action you make, from everything that you put in your mouth to everything that you do.
Exactly right. And so again, this book is just a vessel to kind of deliver some of the scientific information of what you just said. Because I just think a lot of people still don't know that. The listeners right now probably sounds very intuitive to them, right? But again, this is kind of almost like a health bubble in a way. And so the more and more we can get that information out, the more that we can have, a greater conception rates and, smoother pregnancies and healthier children. It starts with us. To your point, kind of the smoking, the drinking, say eating really unhealthy. So what you spoke about before, kind of having these epigenetic downstream effects, this is very, very real. So it's almost like, male and female, they each contribute kind of 50% of the genetic material, and that can't be changed. But the epigenetic part, to your point, that's gene expression, whether you turn something on or off, we have full control over for the most part. So it's like, are we going to smoke, and are we going to drink, and are we going to do all of these things that could potentially influence, right, the next generation? I mean, again, when you look at it from sort of that optimization lens, there's like, i- why wouldn't you do that, right?
Mhm. Totally. Well, my audience and myself are very keen on optimizing. So, in your mind, what is optimal as it pertains to setting the stage for, maximum fertility, and just overall health in general? Because it goes hand in hand. So, like, when you're working with patients, when you're working with people, when you're seeing these come through, like, what's the low hanging fruits that everybody should just be like, hey, look, if you want to get dialed in life and also increase your likelihood of getting pregnant, like, do these things as a bare minimum. And then beyond that, what are the upper level ways to truly get optimized and dialed in?
Yeah. So when approaching this, really with any client, but like for fertility clients, specifically, meaning they're coming in, right? They're looking to optimize fertility. They're looking to build family, looking to get pregnant. I do not look at it through the lens of saying, okay, what can this person eat to like, improve sperm quality or egg quality or even hormones. I absolutely do not view fertility through that lens. Instead, I look at, okay, what are the core sort of biological pillars that if we optimize, they will have a cascading, a downstream effect on everything I just mentioned, right? Sperm quality, egg quality, hormones, all of this. So the way that we do that, it's really phenomenal. One of the ways we already discussed is metabolic health. We can get into sort of tips, tactics, strategies for that. If you want, there's hundreds, literally hundreds in the book and each chapter for this. That sort of, think of that as one pillar. Again, just as an anchor point for everyone listening, the reason I'm looking at that is because your metabolic health is going to influence circulating inflammation in your body. It's going to influence oxidative stress in your body. All of this can run interference between, the communication that's happening between your brain and your gonads, right? Which are testes for men, ovaries for women. We don't want static interference on that communication line, right? So again, that is impacting our receptivity for pregnancy. We are impacting our ecosystem for pregnancy. We're impacting all of these things. So again, that's just a kind of a big picture anchor point, because then it makes everything else that Robert, you and I are about to discuss, it's going to make sense if you think about it through that lens. That is also why there is no sort of one fits all diet approach. Like every single person, I'm tailoring the plan for, because not everyone has the same blood sugar control. Not everyone has the same visceral fat level. Not everyone has the same insulin production. So we tailor it to sort of optimize their biology to hit those marks. For example, we kind of discussed the criteria of metabolic health, right? But I also look at insulin, HbA1c, these sorts of things to kind of have a gauge of, how much we want that needle to move. Another one is thinking about microbiome health. This is also kind of what I consider a very low-hanging fruit. Like if something, I'm sure, and I know you've probably talked about this with a previous guest or to your audience before, but our gut, it's not like Vegas. It's like what happens to the gut doesn't stay in the gut. So
Mhm.
if you're dealing with a lot of inflammation, think about having a very unhealthy lifestyle, everything that entails. That can create an environment for a leaky gut, which means there could be circulating endotoxins that again has a systemic effect. This impacts, say, the seminal fluid and sperm production, sperm quality, right? So again, it's kind of like I'm not necessarily talking about sperm. I'm like, no, what's going to have a downstream impact on this? And it's about optimizing gut function. One of the easiest ways to do that you don't even need an expensive test if needed, even though I run those on all clients, but you don't even need that. You can just start with saying like, okay, use the Bristol stool scale, which is if something's really off, that tells me, the inputs are to the system, your body, right, are also going to be off. That's a very easy way to start. I think about the environment as a huge lever for what people can kind of clean up to help them unblock biological hurdles. So these are just a few pillars. I could clearly be talking about this for 6 hours today. I'm just going to stop there because then we can dive into anything that you're interested in.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in it all. How much emphasis do you put on the environmental toxins as it pertains to just like the consumables that people have in their house without even thinking of, like the soaps, the lotions, the cleaning agents, and then even like the clothes they're wearing, like polyester based, endocrine disrupting plastics. Like how much of an impact does that have on things? Again, that there's upcoming research on that, but like, is there any pulse on how much of an impact that truly plays?
Yeah, I actually have a full chart on this, and I can even pull it up if you want to like dive into like the research stats on it. But essentially, this so how I look at this is basically just one input to the system, just like metabolic health. And so, I encourage people to kind of go through an audit of their life in a non-stressful way. Cause the last thing, like what's worse is having all these like micro nanoplastics or actually stressing out about them,
Right.
right? So again, both of these are like adversarial to our goal.
Totally.
So essentially, I'll give you some frameworks about how I think about it, so then people are not overwhelmed, because the last thing we want is sort of like an obsessive nature about it. Psychology and sort of how we go about our day to day is very, very important to me. So that's kind of why I'm bringing this up. With all of those products, what we know is that, I think about the micro nanoplastics and a lot of the things that you said. The reason why that's problematic is we have sort of this physical particle that you've been hearing about recently in research about how it's kind of found in every organ in the body, right? We also have the chemical component of that. That's the endocrine disrupting chemical that can influence our hormones. So think about it as kind of like a little hacker, if you will, that's kind of like running interference potentially on your hormones. We know that there are a few of those that tend to have a more significant impact than others. So a few of them, for example, it's BPA, it's phthalates, it's PFAS, which are the forever chemicals that are found in things like nonstick Teflon pans. And then we have the pesticides and herbicides. Based off of all of the research on the reproductive outcomes, those are the four that you really need to pay attention to. These are linked to things like fewer eggs being retrieved during IVF cycles, taking a longer time to get pregnant. It's linked to lower odds of getting pregnant, reduced sperm quality and motility. I'm saying these things very, very intentionally because, like I said, I just pulled up a chart that every single research is basically showing these detrimental effects. And like, this is a big deal, right? These aren't mouse models. And so I'm like, wow, this is a modifiable factor that we have in our control. Like, that's amazing. So, for example, I think you've probably discussed before on this podcast, the top three that is going to reduce overall exposure, which is, food, air, and water. I'm happy to go into those, but I'm also happy to discuss some others too. Those are
Yeah.
the top three that I look for. But
Food, air, and water. When it comes to the food, I mean, everyone's going to be super individualized. You have to make it sustainable for them, obviously. You can't put everybody on a strict diet that they would adhere to without, fault, because that's just not realistic. But is there like just common denominators when it comes to nutrition that pretty much everybody would benefit from? Like, there's probably no legitimate case for a high sugar diet being advantageous when it comes to optimizing health and fertility. Are there other like common denominators that you say, hey, try and get this dialed in with your nutrition so that you're at least putting the odds in your favor?
yeah, well, when it relates to kind of like what we're talking about with this specific pillar, which is like the environmental factor and the micro nanoplastic, if we want to reduce our exposure overall, there are absolutely common denominators no matter what diet that you follow. So one of the kind of not necessarily easy, right, in practice, but one of the things that you can do is actually, think about how often are you getting takeout food because of all of the kind of plastic linings, right, that kind of slough off with hot food when you order, if you order DoorDash or things like that every single day. I think about sort of like the cadence by which you're doing that. And if we can switch over to maybe a few home cooked meals, I'm guessing a lot of people who listen into this podcast are already like doing some form of meal prep, which is awesome. So in that case, if I were to personalize it to them, I would definitely make sure they aren't using plastic containers for all their meal prep. So again, like super little things, right? But these are going to compound in their favor and quickly. If you're making all these changes on a weekly basis, just think about how much less chemical exposure or endocrine disrupting chemicals specifically you're reducing. So those, again, super easy tactics. To your point, when you say like, reducing sugar, like, yes, absolutely. That is fundamental. I also think about all of the packaged foods. So like these really think more along the lines of ultra processed foods that like don't really, that are like in the middle aisles of the grocery store that don't really resemble real food. So I'm talking about like, think about like cheese puffs, like this type of thing. The thing is, the more processing a food has, the more exposure of micro nanoplastics that accumulate along with that. And again, it sounds very intuitive when I say that, but I certainly didn't stop and really think about that prior to writing the book. I'm like, that actually makes sense with all the packaging. So again, all of this, if you're eating healthy things, but like every single thing is in a package, it's ultra processed, that's in your diet every day, that is fundamental. That's a fundamental place to start.
Yeah, and as far as like the compounding nature of things, like that gets me excited because, yeah, if you're going to drink out of a plastic water bottle once in a blue moon, that's not going to be the reason you don't get pregnant. But if you look at the actions that you make every single day that just compound, like the water you drink, like the air you breathe, like the clothes you put on, the cleaning products you use, the food you consume, like all of those things, when you look at the compounding nature of that over the course of a lifetime, I mean, it moves the needle in a massive, massive way. And if they could all be improved by simple shifts in your day to day routines, like it's just low hanging fruit that people should immediately opt for.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, I'll give you another one that's like the lowest hanging fruit. Again, just talking about this pillar specifically. They've done I believe this year or it was last year, 2024, 2025. They did a multi-site study showing sort of like, does this truly move the needle, to your point? And yeah, it showed that, like, for example, one of the micronanoplastics that's associated with using a nonstick pan, specifically Teflon, the higher that amount, the poorer the sperm quality in men. So it's kind of like, to your point, all these little things seem so like minutia almost when we're talking about it, but they are. It's producing real clinical effects. It's having real downstream effects on our physiology. And this is within the bucket of micronanoplastic and environmental chemicals that we absolutely have within our control. This is nothing that's sort of like, oh, there's an anatomical reason why you can't get pregnant, which obviously requires a doctor. But no, like, all these things are within our control. To your point, the water bottles, like, man, I mean, it's wild to me that we're like still drinking out of those, except for, travel cases, don't get dehydrated. Please don't take that as a,
Yeah.
as a takeaway. But it's just, people are drinking out of those every single day, which is still kind of wild versus like a stainless steel, container or something of that nature, or getting their coffees. I'm between New York and Miami, so like I see everyone walking down every street in New York with their white coffee cup, and I'm just thinking about that. They're doing that every single day, and it's like leaching into their coffee before they drink it. So again, once you start seeing this stuff, you can't like unsee it, right? A simple tip, because I know again you're into like super tactical takeaways. What can people do immediately to kind of reduce the stress of, say, the other topic that you mentioned a few minutes ago, which is like the soaps, the lotions, this and that. I don't need someone to completely just overhaul everything that they're using, although they're welcome to. I think about, look, if you're out of like the next time you're out of your lotion, how about use that as an opportunity to look for something a little bit cleaner? I like to use the rule of thumb for people trying to get pregnant. I like to use the rule of thumb of, like, if you're lathering these things over large surface areas of your body, think about, would you rub that on a newborn baby's skin? If the answer is no, then you probably shouldn't be using that. I kind of like that perspective because it makes me think about, like, okay, well, if people are using chemical sunscreen all over their body, can they switch to, a mineral one, almost like a baby type formulation, right? That doesn't have all these extra things in it. I think about the same thing with lotion. Like, I don't know, can we maybe use some coconut oil, some shea butter, like all these other options that don't have like a list of 30 things in them. Same with soap. Like, why are we having all these, fragrances in them? Why are we having all these extra chemicals in them? And so again, I kind of just like the takeaway, at least for myself and how I think about it personally, is, use the opportunity to look for ways to upgrade every time you're out of something. That makes it less overwhelming.
Yeah, totally agree.
Hello, y'all. Robert Sikes, the founder of the Savage Perspective Podcast, the host of the Savage Perspective Podcast. As y'all know, we do not roll ads throughout the podcast. This is not an ad technically, but I'm going to throw it in there just in case. The reason I don't put ads in here is because I don't want y'all to be distracted with minutes and minutes of just irrelevant content for me to make a buck. That's not good for y'all. I don't want to be inauthentic like that. However, I would be remiss if I didn't point y'all towards a great resource. So all of the guests that I bring onto the show are designed to give y'all insight, give you information, give you value that allows you to optimize your health from a ketogenic standpoint. I've built out a resource that takes everything I've learned over the years as a podcast host, as a professional natural bodybuilder, as a coach in the space, and I've compiled all that into a very, very comprehensive system, which also includes a community, a membership community from an accountability standpoint. It's got a ton of resources like a free workout app. It's got a AI that's built out based off of all of my content, so it's not giving you conflicting information. And the program has over 150 videos that breaks down all the details as to how to manipulate your macros, optimize your metabolism, build muscle, lose fat, all the good stuff that y'all are striving to do. And also, since I don't do ads on the podcast, All of the affiliate discount links that I have for various different brands live in this program as well. That literally pays for the cost in and of itself. So if you're interested in doing a deeper dive, actually using these tools and reaching your highest self, check out ketobodybuilding.com.
What are the different buckets or pillars that you've outlined in your book? Is it within the realm of something that we could discuss on a podcast, or is it like 500 buckets?
No, there's not 500 buckets. So we have, so I did the chapters in terms of chapter 1, metabolic function, chapter 2, microbiome, chapter 3, methylation, the fourth pillar, right, or the fourth chapter is the micronanoplastics or the environmental chemicals that we just touched upon. And the chapter 5 is mitochondria, which in reality is just basically double clicking on metabolic function, right? Just because when we're talking about metabolic function, like at the smallest unit, we're talking about the mitochondria, which are the organelles within our cells, or at least every cell with a nucleus that is producing that ATP, that energy. And so I kind of, again, rope those into what are the pillars that can really move the needle. And then in every chapter, I mean, Robert, I think you're going to love this. I went back and forth with my publisher for so long because they essentially wanted me to inject more meat into the book, right? They're like more stories, more narrative, this and that. And I was unwilling to compromise. I'm like, no. If people are going to read a book, they want actionable takeaways, strategies. They want all of these things. So it almost doesn't read like a book, right? So it's just
Hey, it's
what
tangible.
can people do? But again, it was just so funny. And that's why I'm laughing to myself because it's when it comes to tactical takeaways, this thing is dense with them. So those are the 5 sort of core chapters by which everything is outlined in them about what you can do. Again, big picture, our anchor point, that we can reduce inflammation in our body, that we can reduce oxidative stress, that we can, make this environment, which is our body, more favorable to reproduce, right? And to carry a child. So those are the 5 kind of components of that. Which one are you interested in? We could dive in more.
Yeah, let's dive into the mitochondrial. Let's optimize ATP. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So this kind of, again, goes back big picture to metabolic health. So if you're having trouble with energy production, one of the first things that we can do is kind of optimize your metabolic health. Because remember, I know everyone kind of went through middle school biology, but this stuff is easy to forget. If you're having, say, a high sugar diet, I'm just going to use the example that you gave earlier. If you're having a lot of sugar in your diet, you're kind of creating this ground where you are damaging the machinery that's used to make energy for your body. That's fundamentally what's happening there. So you're going to make those mitochondria less efficient at doing their job. That is just one of the reasons, one of the things that you can do to support your mitochondria. But this is a much bigger picture in terms of, we think about ATP and energy production, without it, we wouldn't be alive. But just think about some of the, cool facts related to fertility. It's this is what, powers a sperm's journey to the egg, right? That's ATP. So we need that. It powers that rapid cell division that happens right after fertilization. It powers that early embryonic development. So it's every single thing is related to that mitochondrial capacity to produce ATP. Unfortunately, infertility, one of the factors that is being looked at for that, it's related to essentially ovarian aging, right? And so again, I just think about no one wants to accelerate their rate of aging, and so why aren't we looking at ways to optimize mitochondrial health, right? I mean, advanced reproductive technology, all these things, they're looking at super advanced ways to replace mitochondrial, right? Anyways, the science is so advanced, but I'm but we aren't even doing the fundamentals, getting to a healthy body weight, eating a low sugar diet, doing all these things that support the mitochondria. It's wild. Remember the kind of pillar that we just discussed in terms of the environmental factors. So when it comes to the BPA, the phthalates, the PFAS, the pesticides, all of this, these are not favorable at all for the mitochondrial. So that's why that's a pillar in the book, because, you can definitely create more oxidative stress with all of these things, kind of circulating in our body and having that compounded effect. So it's like, we want to protect those precious little organelles within our cells.
Why do you think there is so much emphasis, so much resource and bandwidth and money pouring towards all these incredibly advanced procedures and techniques to replace mitochondrial function and improve fertility when the basic fundamentals have not been? Is that just simply a result of there being more monetary opportunity there, or just the sheer lack or laziness of the human species to want to do the fundamentals? Like, what do you think the root problem is?
I think everything that you just look, this is a huge rabbit hole that I think a lot about, but I will just say that those main points that you touched on, we live in a capitalist society. There's nothing wrong with that. It drives innovation. We need these things. Individuals that have genetic diseases where their mitochondrial is impacted, like they will not be able to have a healthy child. And therefore, like these medical advancements are absolutely needed. So it's not like anti-science in a way, like, look, the more we can kind of pump into these innovations, the better. But again, it's kind of like how we started this podcast, where it's like, what the heck are we doing? We aren't even like paid, we aren't even like honoring the fact that we can do 100 different things that is going to impact our mitochondrial in our favor, but we're just, focusing on all of these like techniques and medical procedures and this and that. But yeah, I think you mainly hit the points of exactly the way I think about it.
It's disheartening though, for sure. Because I mean, like, I don't like taking medication. I don't like doing I don't like going to the doctor. Like, I don't like doing those things, especially if I have the control, within my own realm to just do whatever I need to do, sacrifice whatever I sacrifice to make it work. And I would hope that people in general would just have that same or similar desire. Like, hey, if this is in my power to fix, like, let me fix it through lifestyle design. And it's just it's disheartening to see. And I've got nothing against those Ozempic, but we'll use that as an example. So like a lot of people default to grabbing that so they can get away with eating their Oreo cookies at night. It's like that's just the wrong way to look at it. And people are doing the exact same thing as it relates to fertility, when the thing that they want most is to have a healthy baby, and they're not doing the fundamental basics in their own home to set themselves up for increased likelihood of success with that. It's just sad. Like, I'm just sad.
Yeah, and we can dial in sort of the foundations. That's what's going to move the needle the most, right? Again, I mean, I'm joking about like all like literally the hundreds of strategies I have in the book on each chapter. But look, if you don't have the fundamentals dialed in, which is going to be sleep, exercise, which the exercise component, I'm sure like zero problem with the listeners on this podcast. But if we aren't dialing that, if we aren't getting some like basic things like, going outside in the sunshine every once in a while, right? Putting, grounding ourselves, being out in nature, like just all these fundamental things that are going to support physiology and, for mitochondrial function specifically. I mean, one of the main reasons that we increase mitochondrial biogenesis is through exercise, which again, if you think about it from kind of a biology perspective, that is mind-blowing, that it's almost like our bodies are evolutionary designed to move, right?
Mhm.
And not necessarily this does not have to be in the gym. I know that's not, everyone's cup of tea, but it's like just doing something is going to, stimulate this mitochondrial function, making them work better and producing more of them. That literally means more energy for the cell, more energy for our body. So it's wild that we are just kind of looking at these foundational elements and really dialing those in. That is what's going to move the needle more than anything.
Totally agree. From a nutritional standpoint, again, I know that everyone's going to be highly individualized with their nutrition requirements and preferences, and it's got to be sustainable for them. But do you find that a general recommended course of action as far as nutrition would be beneficial to the masses as it pertains to improving likelihood of fertility and conception? Like, obviously, consuming ample protein, consuming ample nutrition in general, like not being an undernourished, underfed state, not overconsumption. But when it comes to dietary fat requirements, dietary carbohydrate needs, like, Is there like a general rule of thumb that you like to point people to there?
Yeah, so I guess just foundations, lay of the land, to your point, protein, I'm not going to ideally, I don't want really anyone to be eating, but, below 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight. I think that's a great rule of thumb. I know not everyone loves protein. Again, everyone in the audience here is probably doing just fine on the protein front. I think about also, so here's how I just view nutrition in general and for the goal of building a family. It's like for every single bite that you take, or let's call it 90% of the time, is that dense in nutrients? And if not, then is there an opportunity to exchange that for something that is, right? That is how we optimize how our body functions. Nature is intelligently designed. We just need to put those foods in our body and we need to lean into that. So I think about that in terms of protein. In terms of like fat and carbohydrates, for my specific clients, I typically don't do, macros. I don't give them sort of a hard set plan in that way. Because for a lot of people, again, just my clientele, I'm finding it's not as sustainable. So I try to just give them sort of these basic rule of thumbs, like, for fat and carbohydrates, let's say if someone wants to optimize their body composition, and they're doing so in efforts to improve their fertility, that is a time point by which I absolutely do not want them to eat low fat. I would actually want to pull down the carbs. So again, this is just very like simple tactical takeaway, that reducing carbs, eating a lower carbohydrate diet will be more favorable than a low fat diet, right? For kind of helping to strip out visceral fat, like these sorts of things. There's like a ton of research that backs this. Is going to help with insulin sensitivity, this and that. Why I am even mentioning that, because I know that's probably super intuitive, is because I know, like, for competition prep, right, Robert, and, like,
Mhm.
all these sorts of things, you have, like, these different strategies to get there. So that's kinda why I'm, like, just setting the stage in terms of, like, here's how I would, like, these are the nutrients to kind of, like, strip away, or the macronutrients rather. Here's how to kinda design this, so I would think about that.
Yeah, and to your point, like when it comes to competition prep, like I don't even advocate people try and get pregnant within, you know, anywhere close time frame to competition because it takes a long time to recover from a competition prep. So like
Yeah.
you got to give both males and females. Like when I do a prep, I'll let myself go through a reverse diet for 6 months or more
Okay.
before we ever try to have a kid again because it's like you're not fully recovered yet. I mean, hormone function takes a hit. Like you got to be strategic in that manner. So yeah, totally agree with you on that front. Do you
Oh,
find
yeah,
that
I just
there's
think about,
any?
by the way, testosterone, like women's
Oh yeah,
menstrual
yeah.
cycles, and so, yeah, and by the way, thank you for mentioning that too, because I think a lot of women when they're, like, kind of first time, like, entering into, physique prep and this sort of thing, it's hard, and I really hate I will do it, but I kind of hate to be the bad guy that tells them, having this incredible goal, of reaching sort of like your peak fitness and aesthetic goals, that doesn't necessarily align with what we're trying to do, which is like, look, we're trying to communicate like signals of safety for the body,
Mhm.
at least for women. Like I'll speak for myself. Like if we get so low in body fat, like you are literally going to shunt your body's ability to reproduce. It's gonna be like, no way. Like this is not an environment that's safe. We just want you to survive. So you're like shunting at different resources, different places. So again, I just appreciate you kind of mentioning that window of time, right? Like maybe think about reverse dieting 6 months prior, all of that. So
Yeah,
much
yeah, no,
appreciated. Yeah.
that's super important for sure. I wrote about that in my book. It's like, look, if you're trying to get pregnant and you're going through a competition prep, like you're not doing yourselves any favors. And honestly, true too, that applies to post pregnancy, like with breastfeeding. Like if you're trying to give your baby the most nourishing form of nutrition possible through breast milk, like that is going to be impaired if you're in a pretty significant caloric deficit. So you got to make sure you got to kind of put your own physical, you know, aspirations from a physique standpoint kind of secondary to the health of that baby and pregnancy and whatnot. So they typically don't go hand in hand in the same time frame.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But no, I totally like cut you off before with what you were about to ask, but because I get very excited about these topics and they're all so important. But yeah, please continue.
Where was I going? Oh, do you find so like a lot of my audience obviously is following a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet. So they have no dietary carbohydrate intake coming in. And if you go through standard of care fertility doctors, like they're all going to just, recommend a mixed diet with ample carbohydrates. From a legitimate standpoint, if you are consuming adequate nutrition, adequate fats and proteins, and you're in a fed state, there's no inherent disadvantage to not having carbohydrates as it pertains to improving odds of fertility and conception, right?
Are we talking about sort of not cutting out and removing all non-vegetable carbohydrates, or like our, say, dark leafy greens, or these sorts of things still in the diet when you're referring to that?
Yeah, someone following a ketogenic diet, they'll typically have the vegetation and things like that in their low glycemic vegetation, but there are definitely a subset of people doing a carnivore approach where they're pretty much no vegetation whatsoever.
So with the so I'll touch on both of them. I generally, like, if someone is following a carnivore approach, and I do not have many of them who come in with that and are trying to get pregnant, just because I would be very, very concerned about the nutritional adequacy. So, okay, so here's what that looks like. It's kind of like I would probably want to do so many more tests to figure out their nutritional state. I would probably want to do, like, you know, nutritional testing to see mineral status, which aren't perfect, by the way. They're just kind of a proxy. I would need to look into that. I would need to look into so many other things and supplement them so much more that I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with that, because I could not look that person straight in the face and say, like, yeah, we have outcome data to support your approach right now. So that is kind of something I would think about. So tactically, that might look like, for an individual like for a woman coming in who's following just a carnivore diet and eating nothing but meat, literally nothing else, I would have her consider adding just a few things back into her diet for nutritional adequacy. By the way, Robert, I'm not going to suggest that she go on like a standard American diet, Mediterranean diet, like all these other things. I'm just going to be like, okay, how can we just like tweak this a little bit that's going to better support the body in an optimal way, right? So that's kind of how I think about the carnivore approach, for specifically for a woman who is like wanting to get pregnant like in the next month, call it. With the
Mhm.
ketogenic diet, I'm all for the ketogenic diet, but I in practice, I'm using the ketogenic diet as an intervention for someone who has profound insulin resistance, because there's great data to suggest that that can help reverse it and literally kind of reboot
Yeah.
normal hormone function, which is amazing. Now, again, this isn't saying that I think everyone should be on a ketogenic diet at all. It's more for like, I think about nutrition, I think about diet as like interventions, because not everyone is going to find that sustainable. A ketogenic diet isn't necessarily recommended in pregnancy too. So I'm going to think strategically, kind of working backwards, like, okay, our doctors are going to be like, no, you are definitely not doing a ketogenic
Yeah.
practice, but it's going to optimize the odds of conception, especially if someone's in an insulin resistant state needing to reduce body fat. So I'm all for, and so are many, many doctors, because I work hand in hand with them. So essentially, I'm going to think about, okay, can we work on this? Once they become pregnant, can I move her into kind of this lower carb approach? So again, I think about what is going to be sustainable, what is she going to be able to, like, what's going to set her up for success in pregnancy too. All of these things you can just work backwards to consider. So yeah, I like to kind of use very, very specific diets for interventions. But whatever you're following, we really need to ask the question, is it going to be providing all the nutrients that's going to best support the body? And if not, then you're probably looking at a much heavier supplement regimen in order to get that to your body.
And as far as kind of making sure all the requirements have been met, are there like specific blood panels that you would recommend as a baseline for everybody that's looking to conceive?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm kind of thinking through this, how I can answer this question kind of from a more general standpoint. And actually, let me just give you a few examples, then people can kind of, again, I'm all about empowering people with information. So let's go through a few. For basics, the metabolic function bucket, I would think about, like, I think everyone should need needs to know their insulin prior to getting pregnant. That's one in practice. And then they, of course, they can do all the standard workups with their doctor besides that, but usually that panel will not include insulin. So that one is important. This also plays a role in in the development of gestational diabetes during pregnancy. So again, like, that test once, you can kind of paint the picture of how you're responding metabolically. That's going to have multiple favorable downstream impacts. So I think about that in terms of metabolic function. For the microbiome, I think, for most people, they can kind of use their symptoms as the first tool for other areas of microbiome health, so ecosystems that are sort of reproductive relevant. I think about women, and I think about not just the gut microbiome, Robert, I think also about the vaginal microbiome, because that is also associated with fertility outcomes, including miscarriage and recurrent pregnancy loss. I think about if a woman is having just continual repeat symptoms and infections, I would love to sort of do a panel or a consumer-based test that looks at that vaginal microbiome composition, because that is something that can absolutely be corrected prior to pregnancy and therefore improve our chances of conceiving. One consumer-based company is called Evvy, EVVY. I have zero affiliation with them, but it's just something that consumers can order for themselves. For the bucket of methylation, which is essentially just a biochemical process that's going to influence fertility, I am going to be thinking about, if someone knows their homocysteine level, that would be fantastic. Because if that's sky high, that can have an impact on pregnancy. It can impact, odds of conceiving. So I would think about that. I like to see that level under 10. For the environmental bucket, look, I would be lying to you if I say I didn't test that in practice, because we test levels of PFAS, but I would say you do not need to test in order to make changes, right? You do not need to spend extra money to know your levels in order to just get started on all of these beneficial things, right? Like we talked about the
Mhm.
Teflon pans. That's one simple example, and everything else we discussed today. About the mitochondria, again, there are ways to test mitochondria. They aren't necessarily proven in research. The consumer-based version, there are strategies that researchers use primarily to look at that, but that's highly invasive and very impractical. But there are some consumer-based tests that are coming into market. I would rather someone look into all of their measures of blood sugar control, literally everything we talked about so far, in order to look at that. I would love just a few other basics, if I can rattle a few others
Yeah,
off
yeah.
to you. These are very, very low hanging fruit. You need to know your vitamin D prior to getting pregnant, and I would really like someone to know their omega-3 index, if possible, just because that is tied to pregnancy outcomes as well as preterm birth. So that's a pretty easy one. You would look for an omega-3 index. I use Omega Quant. That's the company that I go with. Vitamin D, you can just ask your doctor for that. That should absolutely be included. On a panel, I look typically for levels between 40 to 60. I believe it's nanograms per deciliter. Please don't quote me on that, but that's kind of what I look for in terms of that. But again, these are, I hope everything that I just rattled off to you are pretty basic. There's nothing crazy that I'm mentioning, but these are standard foundations
Mhm.
that can influence outcomes, Robert. Like,
Yeah, people should test for that, whether they plan on getting pregnant or not, just to know their numbers. Totally agree.
yes, exactly.
Out of curiosity, there's been an awesome, a overwhelming prevalence of people jumping on HRT, bioidentical hormones as of late. Do you feel, kind of going back to what we're saying about compounding effect of things over time, do you feel that will have a net positive or net negative effect in fertility rates, epigenetic impact, things downstream? What do you think that will impact or shape the landscape in?
Yeah, so well, I would say for HRT, look, I can only really speak for my practice and the physicians who are prescribing it, right, in the practice. I would say that is typically happening for my clientele after they get pregnant. If someone is looking to optimize hormones, like for example, they're for progesterone and this and that, we're typically having a fertility doctor prescribe those as it relates to odds of conception. But like regular HRT, that's typically happening after pregnancy. So that's I can't speak to that. But for men, this might be very, very relevant for your audience. Like if you're on, if you're taking testosterone, like that is like a male form of birth control. And so if you're on testosterone injections right now and you're looking to conceive, like absolutely just schedule a visit with a, fertility kind of friendly urologist, and they can really, really help with that. But I would not wait for that. Those are kind of the medication discussions that you should have with your doctor, so then they can kind of like, they can tailor it for you, right? They can switch you on to different agents that are more fertility supportive, if you will. Hopefully I answered your question, by the way.
Totally. Yeah, no, for sure. It's gained a lot of traction. Like I feel like every other podcast I have, that's kind of where the questions wind up going. So I'm just curious to see what the downstream effect of that will be, as time progresses. What's the thing that's got you excited beyond the book publishing in January? Like what research or what are you diving into right now that just got you amped up?
I mean, to be honest with you, it's like I see fertility, I care about the entire sort of reproductive health span, if you will, of men and women. I know in this topic we're discussing a little bit more kind of women focused, but I just see fertility as kind of one avenue to help empower women, support women. What has me really amped up is it's like this is just the beginning, right? There's so many aspects that need to be optimized and dived into. I mean, we have to do a better job at empowering an individual with things within their control. And so all of this to say is what has me really amped up. It's like, what can I tackle next for women's health? Is it perimenopause? Is it menopause? Is it, there's so many things that it's like, I think it just feels like I'm doing a disservice knowing what I know to not get that information out. But this is new for me because I spend my days, like, I spend literally every hour, right, with clients one-on-one. And so it's very new to me to kind of step outside of clinic, so to speak, and try to get this information like out of these sort of like elite circles so then everyone can have it, right? Like we need to democratize that information so everyone has the tools that they can use or not use, by the way. I just want people to have information. And so I'm pretty stoked about that kind of stepping even outside my comfort zone to try to, reach larger audiences.
Yeah, I mean, everybody would benefit from this information. And fertility is cool because it kind of, like most people are typically trying to, conceive in their 20s and 30s. So like whether or not they're able to is kind of like the litmus test as to whether or not they are truly healthy, because they could be oblivious to their state of their health if they're not obese or something like that. They just assume that everything's fine. But if they're trying to conceive and not able to, it's like, okay, obviously something's not dialed in properly here. So it's like the first gateway for many to realize that, okay, I've slacked off in areas of my life. Let me get that under control. So it's pretty unique in that aspect.
Oh my gosh, Robert. I mean, look, do you want to do all these podcasts for me? Because then I don't even need to go on it if you're saying things like that. Because yes, that's exactly the point. I mean, fertility, it's like just think of it as kind of like a vital sign. By the way, like all things considered, again, I do not want this extrapolated for people to like not seek medical attention, because I think a lot of like information out there, it's always like, us versus them, like F the system, like that. No. Like all of this should exist in harmony. The reason for that is again, if a male has a varicocele, if a woman has like, tubal obstruction, like it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter the advice you and I give them. Like they're going to need to have medical attention for that. But everything else, it's like, yes, if something is off, we need to uncover why. If we look at that from the root cause to optimize that system or whatever like biological hurdle is happening outside of what I just mentioned, that is only going to benefit you later in life too. Like this is just a spectrum, and fertility is like that first time point that we have to optimize this. That's why there are all these amazing studies coming out of Stanford and other like great medical kind of institutions that are like, oh yeah, like all of a sudden it's like, oh, sperm quality, if you're having low sperm quality, this and that, it also it also ties into someone's, risk for cardiovascular disease and
Mhm.
other things like that later in life. And so again, it's just connecting the dots between this in terms of like, no, this is a reflection of your whole body's health. And this could be the first opportunity you have in your life to optimize everything we do here, like everything you do in the book. I will guarantee that that is also going to support you like in decades to come. That's what's really important to me. So it's like, look, pregnancy or like if you're trying to get pregnant or not, I just want you to optimize these systems in general for your health.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about it. I mean, the things that you're, practicing and preaching here, it's like you may market it as, conception optimizing fertility to get the people to raise their eyebrows and dive deeper and turn the page. But it's like when you turn the page, you recognize that all of this stuff has a profound impact on every single aspect of your life. People need to think of it in a holistic manner and take responsibility for their actions and habits. But if they do that, if everybody just did that and returned to the basics and did the things that we all inherently know to be good and better than what the standard is, the world would be a much better place. That's what I want for everybody.
Yes, and same. I mean, we're so aligned in that. I'll give you some very ultra quick examples. And look, this is a topic that I typically can't even dive into with people because it's too much. It's like connecting the dots is it's really hard. But you just did it very, very eloquently. So thank you for that. I'll give you one example. It's kind of like I'll actually let me go with one that's kind of most obscure when it comes to fertility. It's the gut microbiome, right? Yeah, but we know that's also now associated with or tied to like pretty much every different disease development, right? Like that it kind of goes back to the microbiome as well. Like there was research on all of that and it's incredible. And so I kind of think about that and how they can now like predict, you know, risk like up to I think like 4 years risk of death just based off our microbiome, like all of these models going on. I'm like, that is insane. So again, it's
Mhm.
like, okay, well, if you read the chapter of your book, you're not trying to get pregnant. I know you're still going to benefit. Another microbiome that I talk about in the book is the oral microbiome, which is like literally the lowest hanging fruit for everyone, as far as I'm concerned. Think about the what can occur in the mouth doesn't stay in the mouth, right? It can hitch. It could basically like, hitch a ride in circulation if you have diseases like periodontal disease and this and that, which is, inflammation of the gums and whatnot. But now they're finding these bacteria from our mouth also in the plaques in our brain, right? The amyloid beta plaque. They're finding it in plaques in our heart. And these things are associated with neurodegeneration. It's associated with cardiovascular disease, all of this. And so, yes, the 400 studies the over 400 studies I cited in the book definitely relate in relation to fertility specifically. But to your exact point, Robert, like, again, if you do all those things, think about like how it's going to impact your disease risk later in life
Yeah.
because of all of these associations. It's wild.
Yeah, and it's exciting to be on the frontier of it for sure. So like hats off to you for tackling the book. And I'm super excited for the launch. And I feel like again, anybody would benefit from reading it whether they plan on conceiving or not, because it's just like applicable in every day-to-day life. And going back to like the oral microbiome, I had a podcast the other day and the guy was like, you gotta optimize for nitric oxide levels. And the easiest way to do that is through your oral microbiome. And then having better nitric oxide production is going to have a cascading effect on everything from an ATP and molecular standpoint. So it's like, yeah, it all goes hand in hand. So uh, no fluoride enhanced Colgate toothpaste, basically.
Yeah, and no like carpet bombs to the microbiome with all this like mouthwash and all of that.
Yeah,
Again, like
yeah.
super low hanging fruit, right? Like go to
With the cast iron.
ewg.com, get some like cleaner products. I mean, this stuff is very basic. I know some people, it's like, yeah, keep up on the dental appointments, make sure there's no infections going on, this and that. But I love that you just spoke to a podcast guest about this because yes, like in the crypts of our tongue, we have bacteria that it's like they are the ones that's helping make that conversion possible, right? They're like the first
Hmm.
step for nitric oxide. And it's like, here we are trying to be like over sterilized in our mouth. Like, we always like wiping out all of the bacteria that actually have a very important job,
Hmm.
right? But no, we can take matters in our own hand for oral hygiene. We cannot graze throughout the day and produce more like, acid promoting bacteria. We can like do all of these things in our favor, which is absolutely amazing. Like, what an opportunity we have.
Totally. Well, I'm gonna have to get you back on the podcast, Rachel, because I feel like we could talk for another 3 hours for sure. Until then, though, when do people or where do people go to get the book and dive deeper into your world?
Yeah, so it's available on really everywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, my website, book.rachelswanson.com or rachelswanson.com, like you'll find it there as well. And now kind of my next mission is getting more on social media after like the 3-year hiatus I did to like write this book after work hours, and it hopefully bring a lot more information. So even if you don't get the book, I'm hoping to bring value to people that go to that site as well. So thank you, Robert, so much. It's been
Yeah,
such a
no,
pleasure.
my pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you for fighting the good fight. Keep doing it, and if there's everything I could do to help, move the needle forward, just let me know.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Till next time, I appreciate you, Rachel.
All right. All right. Bye, Robert. Bye.